The sun glinted off Crestwood Manor's serene lake as Ethan Harper cast a line with his son, Oliver, their first moment of peace since losing Anna. But Victoria Kane, the HOA's iron-fisted president, stormed the dock, slapping them with a $750 fine for their illegal fishing. "This isn't your lake," she sneered, unaware Ethan wasn't just a grieving dad. He was a retired millionaire with 6 million reasons to fight back. What started as a petty rule exploded into a battle of wills, with Ethan uncovering Victoria's scheme to seize the lake. One bold move later, he owned it all, flipping the script on the entire neighborhood. How did a quiet fishing trip spark this epic showdown? I'd spent 12 years building a career in venture capital and financial investment, eventually selling my stakes in several tech startups for enough money to retire at 45. But life has a way of reminding you that money isn't everything. My wife Anna lost her battle with cancer last year, leaving me to raise our 16-year-old son, Oliver. The grief nearly destroyed us both. The only thing that seemed to help was fishing, the last activity the three of us had enjoyed together before Anna's health took its final turn. So, when I decided we needed a fresh start, I specifically looked for a home near water, somewhere peaceful, somewhere we could heal. The Crestwood Manor community seemed perfect on paper. Upscale homes, good schools, and a beautiful 8-acre lake nestled in the center of the development. The realtor mentioned there was a homeowners association but assured me it was just the standard stuff. Lawn maintenance, exterior paint colors, the usual. I should have read between the lines when she hesitated before adding, "The HOA president, Victoria Kane, is dedicated to maintaining property value." I didn't think much of it at the time. I dealt with difficult personalities throughout my career. How bad could one neighborhood bureaucrat be? I found out exactly how bad on a quiet Saturday morning in April. Oliver and I had been at the community lake for about an hour, fishing off the small wooden dock. It was the first time I'd seen my son genuinely smile in weeks. He'd just caught his second bluegill and was carefully unhooking it when a sharp voice cut through the peaceful morning. "Excuse me, but what exactly do you think you're doing?" The woman approaching us was in her early 60s, impeccably dressed in what looked like expensive athleisure wear. Her highlighted blonde hair styled in what I can only describe as the universal, "I want to speak to the manager," haircut. She carried a tablet and wore an expression that suggested she had just caught us vandalizing public property. "Good morning," I replied, trying to keep my tone friendly, "just enjoying some fishing with my son." I extended my hand. "I'm Ethan Harper. We moved into the Maple Lane house about 3 months ago." She ignored my outstretched hand completely, instead tapping aggressively on her tablet. "Mr. Harper, fishing is explicitly prohibited in our community lake. This is a direct violation of HOA regulations. I'm Victoria Kane, HOA president." She said this last part as though announcing herself as royalty. "I'll have to issue a violation notice. The fine is $750. I felt Oliver freeze beside me. "There must be some mistake," I said calmly. The realtor specifically mentioned fishing as one of the community amenities. It was a selling point for us. Victoria's thin smile didn't reach her eyes. The regulation was amended last month. All residents were notified via email. Ignorance of the rules doesn't exempt you from following them. She turned her tablet toward me, showing a document with the heading, "Amendment to Recreational Use of Community Lake." The date showed it had been approved just 6 weeks earlier. "We never received any notification about this," I protested. "I personally oversee all communications." "The email was sent to every household," Victoria replied with absolute certainty. "Perhaps you should check your spam folder, though I can't be responsible for residents who don't bother to read official communications." I felt my jaw tighten but kept my voice level. "May I ask why fishing was suddenly banned? This lake is clearly stocked with fish. I could see several bass swimming near the shallow edges of the water." Victoria glanced dismissively at our fishing equipment. "Environmental and safety concerns. The hooks can injure wildlife, and we've had complaints about the smell of fish and bait disturbing residents who are trying to enjoy the lake views from their homes." She looked pointedly at our small tackle box. "Not everyone wants to see this sort of activity while they're having their morning coffee on their patios." Something in her tone made me take a closer look at Victoria Kane. The way she surveyed our modest fishing gear, the slight curl of her lip, this wasn't just about rules. "We're being very careful," I said. "Oliver and I always practice catch and release, and we clean up completely when we're done." Victoria's expression hardened. "Mr. Harper, perhaps you don't understand how things work here at Crestwood Manor. We maintain certain standards in this community. This isn't a public fishing hole. The residents who've lived here for years expect a particular atmosphere." She glanced at Oliver, then back to me. "New residents sometimes struggle to adapt to our community culture. People who are more accustomed to, shall we say, different types of neighborhood." The implication was crystal clear, and I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. I was about to respond when I heard a small sniffle beside me. Oliver had tears welling in his eyes. This was supposed to be our healing place, a spot where for just a little while he could forget that his mother was gone. And now this woman was ruining it with her thinly veiled condescension. "We'll pack up," I said quietly, placing my arm around Oliver's shoulders. "Please email me the details of the fine and the full updated regulations." Victoria's smile returned, victorious. "Excellent. I'm glad we understand each other, and do check your email more carefully in the future, Mr. Harper. We wouldn't want any further misunderstandings." She turned and walked away, her designer sneakers hardly making a sound on the manicured grass. As we gathered our equipment, Oliver wiped his eyes. "Dad, why was that lady so mean? We weren't hurting anything." I didn't have a good answer for him, at least not one that was appropriate to share with a 16-year-old. "Some people just like rules more than they like people, sweetheart," I said finally. "Let's go home and have some lunch." Later that day, after checking my email, including spam folders, and finding no notification about the fishing ban, I started researching our HOA more thoroughly. What I discovered was illuminating. Victoria Kane had been HOA president for 10 consecutive years. Her day job, owner of a small but exclusive real estate company specializing in luxury community properties. I also found several social media posts from Victoria herself, hosting waterfront parties at the very same lake where she'd just fined me for fishing. Many of these events featuring alcohol and loud music, apparently exempt from the concerns about community atmosphere. Most revealing was a clause buried deep in the HOA documentation. The lake was actually listed as a common property amenity belonging to all residents. There was no legal distinction suggesting the HOA had absolute control over its use. As I looked out my window toward the lake that evening, I saw Victoria and what appeared to be a group of friends gathered at a lakeside gazebo, wine glasses in hand, laughing. "So, they want to play the rules game," I murmured to myself. "Fine, but first I need to find out who actually owns this piece of water." The following morning, I ran into an older gentleman walking his dog past my house. He introduced himself as Samuel Carter, a retired attorney who lived 3 doors down. When I mentioned my encounter with Victoria Kane, his friendly expression immediately darkened. "Ah, you've met our neighborhood dictator," he said with a grimace. "Let me guess, she quoted some obscure regulation and issued a fine." When I nodded, Samuel shook his head. "Victoria's been running this place like her personal fief for years. Most people just pay the fines and keep their heads down." He glanced around and lowered his voice. "If you're interested in some background information, why don't you come by for coffee sometime? I've got quite a collection of HOA horror stories." I took him up on his offer that same afternoon. Samuel's home was filled with law books and framed photographs of what I assumed were former colleagues or clients. Over exceptionally good coffee, he shared what he knew about our community's power structure. "Here's what most residents don't realize," Samuel explained, pulling out a folder filled with documents. "The lake isn't actually owned by the HOA. It's owned by Horizon Realty Group, the original developers of this community. They leased recreational rights to the HOA for a 25-year term, which is why Victoria and the board can set usage rules." He tapped a document with a highlighted date. "That lease expires in less than 1 month. This caught my attention immediately. What happens then? Technically, Horizon could renew the lease, sell the lake outright to the HOA, or find another buyer entirely. Most residents have no idea. They think the HOA owns everything in the community." Samuel leaned forward. "But here's where it gets interesting. I've heard through some contacts that Horizon is facing financial difficulties and might be looking to liquidate assets quickly, and our friend Victoria knows this. Over the next hour, Samuel and I dug deeper into public records. What we discovered was a pattern of manipulative behavior by Victoria that went far beyond petty rule enforcement. Through various shell companies connected to her real estate business, she had been quietly acquiring properties throughout the neighborhood whenever residents were forced to sell, often after being hounded out by excessive HOA fines and violations. And now she's after a bigger game, Samuel concluded. From what I've gathered, she's been in private talks with Horizon to purchase the lake property herself. Not for the HOA, mind you, for her own real estate development company. Word is she plans to reduce lake access and build additional luxury homes on part of the shoreline. This explained the sudden fishing ban. It wasn't about environmental concerns at all. It was about gradually restricting lake usage to prepare for a complete change in ownership. Samuel introduced me to another ally, Marcus Thompson, a retired local bank owner and one of the few residents who openly opposed Victoria's leadership. Marcus, an elegant African-American man in his 60s, had experienced Victoria's subtle discrimination firsthand. Marcus invited us to his study the following evening, where he revealed a meticulously maintained database tracking HOA activities over the past decade. I started this as a simple record-keeping exercise, he explained, gesturing to his computer screen filled with spreadsheets, but it quickly became apparent that there was a pattern to Victoria's enforcement actions. The data was undeniable. Homeowners of color received violation notices at nearly 4 times the rate of their white neighbors. New residents were cited for infractions that long-standing homeowners routinely got away with. And most tellingly, properties that eventually sold at below-market rates due to compliance issues frequently ended up in the hands of shell companies with connections to Kane properties. Her real estate operation is clever, Marcus explained, pulling up property records. She never purchases directly. Instead, she uses a network of LLCs, Crestwood Ventures, Kane Properties, Pine Ridge Holdings, all ultimately tracing back to her but obscured enough to avoid obvious connection. He showed me documentation of 8 different homes that had been purchased this way over the past 7 years, all following the same pattern. Excessive HOA violations, declining property values, desperate sales, and eventual high property resales after cosmetic renovations. Samuel nodded grimly. The lake is her endgame. Horizon Realty has been struggling since the recession. They overextended on commercial properties and have been quietly liquidating residential assets to cover debts. The lake was never meant to be permanent green space, Marcus added. The original development plan from 20 years ago actually included lakefront condominiums, but environmental regulations at the time prevented construction. Those regulations have since been relaxed. With the right connections at City Hall, which Victoria certainly has, permits could be issued for limited development. A half-dozen luxury lakefront homes could easily bring in 5 or 6 million in revenue. My professional interest was piqued. Tell me more about Horizon's financial situation, I said. As a former venture capitalist, I was well versed in recognizing distressed assets and opportunity. Over the next few days, Marcus connected me with former banking colleagues who provided discreet insights into Horizon's precarious position. The company had taken on substantial debt financing a commercial development that had fallen through when anchor tenants pulled out during the pandemic. Their credit lines were maxed, and they were quietly selling off land holdings to avoid bankruptcy. The lake property, valued at roughly $400,000, was one of their few remaining unencumbered assets. Meanwhile, Samuel had been quietly arranging small gatherings with other disgruntled residents. We met in rotating locations, sometimes at Marcus's home, sometimes at the local library's private rooms, once even in the back room of a sympathetic resident's bakery shop. The stories shared a disturbing pattern. She cited me for excessive holiday decorations the day after I spoke against her at the town council meeting. Benjamin Holt, a retired teacher, told our small group. I've had the same Christmas lights for 10 years, but suddenly they violated some obscure brightness ordinance. My foster children were banned from the community pool for being too loud, shared Sophia Ramirez, a healthcare worker whose 3 foster kids had been swimming when Victoria's grandchildren wanted to use the pool. When I asked which rule they had broken, she said it was her executive decision as HOA president. Emily Harper, a young widow who had moved to the community just before me, described how Victoria had personally led an inspection committee through her backyard, claiming to check for mosquito breeding grounds. 2 days later, I received violation notices for 5 different issues, all things that my neighbors have but weren't cited for. When I pointed this out, Victoria suggested that perhaps this community isn't the right fit for someone in your situation. Each story revealed Victoria's tactical approach: isolate potential opposition, apply selective pressure through HOA mechanisms, and either force compliance or drive people out. Those who stayed learned to keep their heads down. Those who fought back found themselves facing escalating harassment. Through these meetings, we identified potential allies throughout the community. Marcus created a secure messaging group where residents could share experiences and information without fear of retaliation. We were building what amounted to an underground resistance within our own neighborhood. I also began researching Victoria's personal financial situation. As an investor, I knew how to read between the lines of property records and business filings. What I discovered surprised me. Despite her carefully cultivated image of success, Kane Properties was highly leveraged. Victoria had taken out multiple lines of credit against her existing properties, likely to maintain her lavish lifestyle and fund her attempts to acquire new properties. If the lake development plan fell through, she would be in serious financial trouble, I explained to Samuel and Marcus during one of our strategy sessions. She's not just doing this for profit. She's doing it out of necessity. Based on these financial records, she's overextended. The lake development isn't just an opportunity for her, it's financial survival. This information changed our calculus. We weren't just facing a neighborhood tyrant. We were dealing with someone fighting for their economic life. That made her more dangerous but also more vulnerable. At Marcus's suggestion, I also reached out to Daniel Lee, a real estate broker who had insider knowledge about the lake property in the local market. We met at a coffee shop 15 miles away to ensure privacy. Victoria's been trying to put together financing to purchase the lake property for about $400,000, Daniel confirmed, keeping his voice low despite the distance from our community. Horizon Realty is in financial freefall and needs to close quickly. They've given her a 45-day exclusive negotiation period, but they're so desperate that they might accept a better offer if it came with immediate payment. Daniel also revealed something even more interesting. Victoria's real estate empire is mostly smoke and mirrors at this point. Kane Properties looks impressive on paper, but she's leveraged to the hilt. Hello. Thanks for watching and being part of this journey. If you enjoy story like this, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support means the world. Now let's dive into the story. She's been using her HOA connections and social network to maintain the appearance of success, but the truth is she's about 3 bad months away from serious trouble. That's why she's so aggressive about this lake deal. She needs a big win to keep her creditors at bay. With this information, I began formulating a plan. As a venture capitalist, I had specialized in identifying distressed but potentially valuable assets, exactly what this lake property represented. I had the capital to make an immediate all-cash offer that would be extremely attractive to a cash-strapped developer like Horizon. The question was timing. We need to wait until Victoria has fully committed herself publicly to this project, Marcus advised. Let her announce the special assessment for lake improvements. Let her put her reputation on the line with the community and with her creditors. Then we pull the rug out from under her. Samuel agreed. The more resources and political capital she expends before we make our move, the more devastating the impact will be when we succeed, and the more likely the community will turn against her when they realize they've been manipulated. As our coalition grew and our plans developed, we maintained absolute secrecy about our ultimate strategy. To the outside world, and especially to Victoria's network of informants within the community, we appeared to be simply a group of disgruntled residents documenting HOA overreach. Victoria clearly knew we were meeting, as evidenced by the sudden increase in random rule enforcement against those associated with our group, but she couldn't know our true objective. With the information gathered from our various sources, we were ready to move to the next phase of our plan. Daniel arranged a discreet meeting with James Carter, the Horizon executive handling the lake property sale. As I prepared for this crucial conversation, I knew we were approaching the point of no return in our battle against Victoria Kane. The stakes were high, not just for me and Oliver, but for the entire community. It was time to see if our careful preparation would pay off. The meeting with James Carter took place in a private room in a downtown law office, far from curious eyes in our community. As Daniel had mentioned, Horizon was indeed desperate to offload assets quickly. "Look, I'll be straight with you," James said after we'd covered the preliminaries. "We've given Kane Properties a 45-day exclusive negotiation window, but there's a clause that allows us to entertain other offers if they come with guaranteed rapid closing. Victoria's still trying to pull together investors and financing, but frankly, we needed the cash yesterday." "What's her offer?" I asked. $400,000 paid over a 12-month period with a complicated financing structure, James replied, his frustration evident. "Our CFO is pushing us to liquidate non-core assets immediately to shore up our commercial development downtown." I nodded thoughtfully, then made my move. "I can offer $450,000, all cash, with closing in 10 days. James's eyebrows shot up. "That would certainly get my board's attention," he said, clearly surprised by the directness of my offer. "But I should warn you, Victoria Kane has friends in the local government. She won't take this lying down." "I'm counting on it," I replied with a smile. 2 days later, I had a preliminary agreement in hand, contingent only on a standard environmental assessment that could be completed within the week. To maintain secrecy, the purchasing entity was listed as Harper Holdings LLC, a company I created specifically for this transaction. Unless Victoria personally investigated the corporate registration, she wouldn't immediately connect it to me. As I built my coalition and investigated my options, Victoria apparently caught wind of my activities. Suddenly, I began receiving violation notices for issues that had never been mentioned before: improper weed control, unauthorized landscaping materials, mailbox height violations, and even a citation for my garage door being the wrong shade of taupe despite being painted the exact color approved when I moved in. The fines began piling up, $150 here, $250 there. Within 3 weeks, I'd accumulated nearly $3,000 in violations. When I tried to contest them, my appeals were mysteriously lost or denied without explanation. It was clear that Victoria was using every tool at her disposal to pressure me into conformity. Then came a particularly troubling incident. Oliver had left his bicycle in our driveway while running inside to answer a phone call. Within 20 minutes, a violation notice appeared on our door, complete with photographs of the infraction. Someone had been watching our house, waiting for any minor slip-up to pounce on. The systematic nature of the harassment was becoming increasingly obvious. The targeting wasn't limited to just me. Anyone seen associating with our group soon found themselves subject to similar treatment. Sofia Ramirez received a citation for her lawn being a half-inch too high, measured precisely by Victoria herself. Benjamin Holt was fined for a bird feeder that had been in his yard for over a decade but suddenly violated an obscure aesthetic guideline. Emily Harper received a notice about improper trash disposal when her recycling bin was 8 inches too close to her garage. It was a clear campaign of intimidation, but it was having the opposite effect than Victoria intended. Instead of scaring people away from our coalition, her heavy-handed tactics were driving more residents to our secret meetings. With each new absurd violation, another neighbor joined our messaging group. By the 3rd week, we had representatives from nearly 40 households, over a quarter of the community. The final straw came when my son returned from school in tears. "The kids at school are saying we're troublemakers," he sobbed. "Chloe said her mom told her we're trying to bring down property values and that we don't belong here." Chloe's mother, I discovered, was Natalie Brooks, one of Victoria's closest allies on the HOA board. The battle had now extended to targeting my child. That night, after Oliver was asleep, I called Samuel. "I'm considering selling the house and moving," I admitted. "This is affecting Oliver too much." "That's exactly what she wants," Samuel replied firmly. "Victoria's done this to at least 8 other families I know of. She hounds them with violations until they sell, usually at below market value because of the problems with the property, and then her real estate connections snap them up. Don't give her that satisfaction." He was right, of course. Walking away would be letting Victoria win, and worse, it would be teaching Oliver the wrong lesson about standing up to bullies. That same evening, I received word that the environmental assessment on the lake had come back clean, and Horizon's board had accepted my offer. The paperwork was ready to sign. Later that night, while reviewing the HOA governing documents again, I discovered something crucial. Victoria's proposed special assessment to improve lake amenities, which everyone understood was her way of raising funds to purchase the lake, required 70% homeowner approval, not the simple majority she had claimed at the meeting. She was attempting to bypass the HOA's own rules, confident that no one would challenge her. "They've brought this fight to my son," I said to myself as I closed my laptop. Time to show them what happens when you anger someone who's spent their career learning how to break down and rebuild systems. The next morning, I withdrew $450,000 from my investment accounts, approximately 20% more than Victoria's offer for the lake property. I called Marcus Thompson, who not only encouraged my plan but offered to loan me another $75,000 to ensure we had enough leverage. Within 48 hours, I had signed all the paperwork with Horizon Realty Group. The lake, all 8 acres of it, including the surrounding 15-foot shoreline perimeter, now belonged to me, not the HOA, and certainly not Victoria Kane. What made the transaction particularly sweet was the timing. The day after I closed the deal, Victoria had scheduled a special HOA meeting to announce her vision for the future of our lake. She had even hired a local architecture firm to create renderings of proposed improvements, which, based on the preview I'd seen on the community bulletin board, included reducing the actual water area by about 25% to make room for a members-only lakeside lounge that would have conveniently eliminated the main fishing spots. I kept this information absolutely confidential, sharing it only with Samuel and Marcus. Meanwhile, Victoria was becoming increasingly aggressive, holding an emergency HOA meeting to announce a special assessment for critical community improvements. $75 per month additional fees from each household, supposedly for lake maintenance but actually to build her war chest for the purchase. At the meeting, Victoria stood at the podium with a PowerPoint presentation titled, "Elevating Crestwood Manor, a Premier Vision." She spent 20 minutes outlining how the strategic reimagining of the lake area would enhance property values and community prestige. What she didn't mention, of course, was that her real estate company would be handling the development and sales of the new lakefront properties she planned to build. Victoria also launched a thinly veiled smear campaign against me. Without naming me directly, she spoke about certain new elements in our community who don't understand our values, and financially unstable individuals trying to undermine property values. Marcus bravely stood up to defend me, only to have Victoria publicly humiliate him by bringing up a long-resolved tax issue from his past. "I find it interesting," Victoria said with mock sweetness, "that Mr. Thompson feels qualified to lecture us about community standards when he himself had to negotiate with the IRS over unpaid taxes just a few years ago. Perhaps we should focus on getting our own houses in order before criticizing others." It was a low blow. Marcus had indeed faced an audit, but it was due to a clerical error that had been fully resolved. The way Victoria framed it, however, made it sound like he was a tax cheat. The meeting devolved further when Olivia Reed tentatively suggested that perhaps a community vote should be taken before changing lake regulations so drastically. Victoria fixed her with an icy stare. "Olivia, I believe the flower shop lease renewal is coming up soon, isn't it? It would be a shame if there were any complications with that." The threat was barely concealed, and Olivia immediately backed down. As I watched this public display of intimidation, I felt a strange sense of calm. Victoria had no idea that her grand plans had already been derailed, that the lake she was presenting as the centerpiece of her vision no longer belonged to Horizon and would never belong to her. The satisfaction of knowing what was coming almost made up for the months of harassment. Meanwhile, Victoria had used her connection with Mayor Michael Grant to create administrative pressure on me. Suddenly, my home was subject to random safety inspections, and questions were raised about building permits for renovations the previous owner had completed years ago. The mayor himself didn't dirty his hands directly, but his building inspector, a cousin of Victoria's by marriage, was suddenly very interested in the structural integrity of my deck. The pressure was working. When Oliver came home crying for the 3rd time in 3 weeks because classmates were excluding him based on rumors about our family, I nearly gave in. But then I received the phone call I'd been waiting for. Horizon's lawyer confirmed that Victoria had just been informed that the lake property had been sold to an anonymous third-party investor and that all negotiations with her were terminated. Within hours, Victoria was on my doorstep, her carefully maintained composure visibly cracking. What did you do? She demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. I know you've been talking to Horizon. Did you sabotage my deal? I smiled pleasantly. I have no idea what you're talking about, Victoria. Though, I did hear the lake property was sold. I hope the HOA has a good relationship with the new owner. Her eyes narrowed. This isn't over. The HOA has a binding recreational use agreement. Whoever bought that lake can't change access without our approval. I think you should check the terms of that agreement, I replied calmly. From what I understand, it expires in less than 30 days, and renewal is at the sole discretion of the property owner. Victoria's face paled slightly, but she recovered quickly. The community won't stand for this. We'll sue for right of access. Good luck with that, I replied, still smiling as I closed the door. The next 24 hours were fascinating to observe. Victoria called an emergency HOA board meeting, closed to the general community. Through our network, we learned she was frantically trying to identify the new owner and develop strategies to maintain control of the lake. She even enlisted Mayor Michael Grant to look into possible zoning restrictions or eminent domain claims, all of which Samuel assured me were legally baseless given the property's history and designation. Over the next week, Victoria grew increasingly desperate. She convened an emergency legal committee meeting, claiming the HOA would fight to maintain their rights to the lake. The mayor began making noise about zoning regulations and public access requirements, though, as Samuel confirmed, none of these had any legal standing given the property's private status. Meanwhile, I quietly met with a water quality expert and a local conservation organization to assess the lake's ecological health. What they found was concerning. Years of unregulated landscaping chemicals from surrounding properties had created abnormal algae growth, and the fish population was showing signs of stress. The HOA had been completely neglecting the actual environmental health of the lake while using environmental concerns as an excuse to restrict activities like fishing. I also consulted with a security expert about installing cameras and creating a proper management plan for the property. Everything was being prepared for the moment when I would reveal myself as the new owner. The turning point came when Victoria decided to make a bold statement. She organized a massive lakeside party for all original homeowners, conspicuously excluding the newer residents, to assert our community rights to our lake. The event was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, complete with catered food, music, and prominently displayed wine bars at each end of the lake. What Victoria didn't know was that I had already filed the necessary paperwork to terminate the recreational use agreement early, citing multiple violations of the maintenance terms. My attorney had confirmed that the HOA's neglect of water quality standards provided ample grounds for immediate termination, though the agreement would have expired in less than a month anyway. I decided this was the perfect moment for the big reveal. As Victoria's party reached full swing, with about 80 residents drinking and socializing around the lake, I arrived with Samuel, Marcus, and two unexpected guests, my real estate attorney and a local police officer I'd briefed on the situation. Walking calmly into the center of the gathering, I picked up the microphone Victoria had been using for announcements. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this beautiful day at the lake. Victoria immediately rushed over, attempting to take the microphone. This is a private community event. You weren't invited. I held on to the microphone firmly. Actually, Victoria, I think there's been some confusion about who should be inviting whom. I nodded to my attorney, who handed me a document. As the legal owner of this lake and all surrounding property within 15 feet of the shoreline, I'm informing you that you are all currently trespassing on private property. The crowd fell silent. Victoria's face flushed deep red. What are you talking about? This is HOA. No, Victoria, it never was. It belonged to Horizon Realty until 3 days ago, when I purchased it outright. I held up the deed for everyone to see. And, effective immediately, I'm terminating the recreational use agreement that's set to expire in 21 days anyway. I gestured to the police officer. I've asked Officer Patel here to help ensure an orderly departure from my property. You have 20 minutes to gather your belongings and leave the premises. Victoria's face was a study in shock, like someone had just thrown a bucket of ice water over her. You can't do this. The community has rights. Actually, I can, and I have, I replied calmly. And Officer Patel has a trespassing complaint ready to file if necessary. But I'm sure it won't come to that. After all, Victoria, you've always been such a stickler for following the rules. As the crowd began murmuring in confusion, I continued. For those wondering, this is what happens when you allow someone to abuse power unchecked for years. Consider this a lesson in consequences. The party dispersed quickly, with many guests shooting accusing looks at Victoria as they left. Several people approached me privately, expressing a mix of shock and, surprisingly, respect. About time someone stood up to her, one longtime resident whispered as he passed. This has been a long time coming. Within the week, I had private property, no trespassing signs installed around the lake perimeter and hired security to patrol the area 12 hours a day. I also organized a small press conference with the local newspaper to announce my plans to convert the lake into a natural fish conservation area and educational space for children to learn about the local ecosystem. The lake has been environmentally neglected for years, I explained to the reporters. Our water quality tests show concerning levels of phosphates and nitrates from lawn chemicals. My team of environmental experts will be implementing a restoration plan to return this beautiful resource to a healthy state. The community reaction was mixed but increasingly favorable as details of Victoria's planned development leaked out. Many residents who had initially been upset about losing lake access became supportive when they learned about her intention to build private homes on part of the shoreline. The revelation that she had been planning to profit personally from community property shifted public opinion dramatically. Victoria was livid. She attempted to sue me for destruction of community value, but her case was dismissed almost immediately when my attorney presented the clear property deed and expired access agreement. She then tried to rally the HOA to implement punitive measures against me. Additional fines, restrictions, even attempting to force a lien on my property, but many residents were beginning to question whose interests she really represented. The tide truly turned when Olivia Reed finally found the courage to speak up at an HOA meeting. I've been on this board for 4 years, she said, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger. And I've watched Victoria manipulate regulations, target specific homeowners, and divert HOA funds to pet projects that primarily benefit her friends' properties. Last year, we spent $100,000 to renovate the Northside Park that only serves about 12 homes, all owned by Victoria's friends, while rejecting basic playground equipment for the main park used by dozens of families. Olivia's stand inspired others. At the next HOA meeting, several longtime residents spoke up about various abuses they had witnessed but been afraid to mention. The floodgates had opened, and years of pent-up frustration with Victoria's leadership poured out. A motion was proposed to audit all HOA finances for the past 7 years. More board members began to question Victoria's leadership as financial records were scrutinized and irregularities emerged. The community was fracturing, but not along the lines Victoria had expected. Instead of uniting against me, many residents were beginning to see the HOA leadership as the real problem. As more residents began to question Victoria's leadership, I announced a special program, free fishing passes for all children in the community. There was just one exception. Children of current HOA leadership would not be eligible until their parents resigned from the board. It was petty, perhaps, but effective. The most satisfying moment came when several residents who had previously sneered at me alongside Victoria started showing up at my door, asking if their children could possibly be granted fishing passes. My son really wants to learn to fish, admitted Natalie Brooks, who had vocally supported Victoria at HOA meetings. He says your son mentioned a junior conservation program. Her discomfort was palpable as she stood on my doorstep, the same woman who had deliberately turned away when I greeted her at the community pool just weeks earlier. Yes, we're starting an educational program for kids, I confirmed. It focuses on ecology, conservation, and sustainable fishing practices. Oliver is helping to organize it. I paused deliberately. Of course, it's only open to families who aren't currently represented on the HOA board. Natalie's expression was a fascinating mixture of frustration and calculation. I've been reconsidering my position on the board lately. The recent decisions seem quite concerning. How interesting, I replied neutrally. Well, if your situation changes, please let me know. The program starts next Saturday. Within 3 days, Natalie had publicly resigned from the HOA board, citing personal reasons. 2 other board members followed suit within the week. Victoria grew desperate. She spread rumors that the lake was polluted and dangerous, claims I quickly debunked by publishing professional water quality test results showing it was actually cleaner than when under HOA management. Then she made her most desperate move yet, attempting to bribe Samuel Carter with promises to clear all his past HOA violations and offering him a position on a new board once she resolved the lake situation. What she didn't know was that Samuel recorded the entire conversation. "I can make all those violation notices disappear," Victoria's voice said clearly on the recording, "and there would be a place for you on the restructured board with a stipend, of course. All you need to do is help convince Harper to sell the lake to the HOA. Tell him about the environmental liabilities, the insurance costs. Scare him a little." Samuel played the recording for me with a satisfied smile. "I think our friend Victoria has forgotten the first rule of being a villain. Never try to corrupt a retired ethics attorney." The final act of Victoria's reign came late one night when my security cameras captured her and 2 other HOA board members trespassing on my property, apparently attempting to collect water samples or, more likely, contaminate the water to support her pollution claims. The footage clearly showed Victoria pouring something from a small bottle into the lake near where children often fished. I immediately sent the video to the police. Victoria was charged with criminal trespassing and attempted environmental contamination. As she was being processed at the local police station, investigators began looking more closely at HOA finances during her tenure. What they found led to additional investigations into misappropriation of funds, selective enforcement of regulations based on personal relationships, and evidence that she had been using her position to drive down certain property values before her real estate connections purchased them. 2 weeks later, I invited all community residents except the current HOA leadership to a meeting at my home to discuss the future of the lake. The turnout was extraordinary, with nearly every household represented. I laid out my proposal. I would transfer ownership of the lake to a newly established community trust with 3 conditions. First, the HOA leadership would need to be completely restructured with term limits and transparent voting procedures. Second, all HOA regulations would be reviewed and amended to ensure fair and equal application. Third, an independent ethics committee with rotating community membership would be established to oversee HOA decisions. Then I revealed my final move, one that even Samuel and Marcus hadn't known about. "Many of you may not be aware," I explained to the stunned gathering, "but during the past month, I've also been quietly purchasing the mortgage notes on several properties in this community from Crestwood Community Bank." I paused to let this sink in. Including Victoria Kane's home. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Using my financial connections and Marcus's banking relationships, I had indeed purchased the debt obligations on nearly 25% of the community's homes, focusing particularly on properties owned by Victoria and her closest allies. It was perfectly legal, if unconventional, and gave me significant leverage. "I have no intention of foreclosing on anyone or calling in these debts," I assured the concerned faces before me. "In fact, I'm prepared to offer refinancing at below market rates to every homeowner. But first, we need to fix the broken system that's been dividing this community for years." The vote to replace the HOA leadership was nearly unanimous. Victoria Kane was forced to resign in disgrace, facing not only the criminal charges for trespassing and attempted contamination but also multiple civil lawsuits from homeowners who had been unfairly targeted by her policies. Her real estate company came under investigation for unethical practices. And within months, she had put her house on the market, finding no takers due to her now toxic reputation. Olivia Reed was elected as the new HOA president, promising comprehensive reforms and transparency. The lake was officially renamed Anna's Lake in honor of my late wife, and I transferred ownership to the newly established community trust with legally binding conditions, ensuring it would remain accessible to all residents in perpetuity. 6 months after the ordeal began, Oliver and I sat on the dock at Anna's Lake, lines cast into the shimmering water. The community had rallied around us, their laughter and chatter from a nearby fishing day fading into the evening. Oliver's smile, brighter than I'd seen since Anna's passing, mirrored the sunset's glow. "Mom would be proud of you, Dad," he said, his voice steady. "I think she'd be proud of both of us, kiddo," I replied. A year later, Crestwood Manor stood transformed, its new HOA a beacon of fairness, inspiring nearby communities to adopt our model. Anna's Lake, now a thriving conservation hub, hosted children's ecology workshops led by Oliver, who'd found purpose in teaching others what Anna taught us: to cherish simple moments. Victoria Kane, stripped of influence, had vanished, her empire crumbled under lawsuits and shame. I turned down a mayoral run but founded a scholarship in Anna's name, aiding kids who'd lost parents to cancer. As Oliver and I released a bluegill back into the lake, its ripples carried a truth. Justice isn't just about toppling tyrants, it's about building something better. If you're battling your own HOA Goliath, take heart. Know the rules, bide your time, and strike when the moment's right. The lake's waiting,